Hi, Lawyer to Lawyer fans. This is Bob Ambrogi. After recording our last show about the rights of transgenders in the military, Craig Williams and I stayed on the phone and continued to talk about the topic at some length. We recorded our conversation and wanted to share it with you. I checked with the guests and asked if it's okay with them if we do that, and they were fine with it. So if you were a fan of last week's episode, check out this bonus content from that show.
Yeah, that's the one thing that I didn't get to discuss. Do you have just like 10 seconds?
Sure.
So, I'm just trying to figure out, there's no win for the White House here. There's none. This goes to court. They're going to end up squaring off with their own Pentagon because the Pentagon can subtly support the position of the plaintiff, right? So going to war with your own Pentagon in court, and if you lose, that's bad for the White House, right? Both in terms of image and exerting control over the military and giving the impression that you're in charge. And what do? Do you fire Mattis at that point? So you don't win by going to court and potentially losing, but even if you do go to court and you win, you still went to war with your own Pentagon in court, and you produce thousands of ready-made victims for cable news every night. We can put somebody and their family and their wife and their kids on CNN and MSNBC and ABC and any other cable news network we want every night from now to the election on what the administration did.
It's harder to know whether he's ever actually thinking these things through before he does them, or what possesses him.
The numbers.
My biggest concern is funding for the transition treatment. Whether that is something that and that's clearly something that Congress can by itself, and appears to had at least in the House of Representatives some legislation that is geared towards taking that away. That's my biggest fear. The other part of it, I agree. I don't think that there's any way that they're going to roll back the policy without having a huge loss. But the funding is the bigger concern in my book.
Yeah, I worry about them cutting off medical care, but cutting off surgery is one thing. Cutting off hormones is another. Because then you can make a really, really clear equal protection claim that why does a cisgender woman have a right to this medication, but a transgender woman doesn't?
And I think that
does that make sense?
Denial of the hormone treatments can also be shown to be a readiness issue. I mean, that is truly
right.
Taken away.
And if you force a transgender person to go cold turkey off of hormones, that's distinctly unpleasant. I don't know if anybody's married, but if their wife has ever had a hysterectomy, it's like basically having a hysterectomy, and the hot flashes and stuff that go with that. So there's a physiological suffering to that as well. And the other thing is I can't figure out is this issue has 2-to-1 public support in favor of letting trans people serve. So it's not and the support for Trump on this is even lower than his overall approval rating. By his approval ratings at about 38%, according to 538. But the I think it was Pew poll found that only 27% of the American public supported Trump's tweets for kicking transgender people out.
Yeah, the only plausible theory I've heard is just that he was just making a play to the far right, to the religious right, with whom he's been upsetting some members of that some sectors of that community, and that was his only reason for doing this, was to win favor with the religious right.
The other theory that's floating around out there that I deem plausible is that in the House of Representatives, there's an appropriations bill where conservative members of the House Freedom Caucus, keep trying to attach the old Hartzler Amendment, which failed to make it into the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, which would block money for medical care for transgender service members. And that's setting off a big fight inside the Republican caucus. So what Politico reported was that because they can't move this appropriations bill forward because there's fighting over whether or not to include an amendment banning medical care for transgender service members, the appropriations bill can't go forward. But part of this appropriations bill is the money for like the first 74 miles of the wall on the border that the Trump administration promised during the campaign. So there's some speculation that Trump just dropped this ban in order to make the Hartzler Amendment a moot point so that the appropriations bill can go forward and the wall can get started. Politico reported that one member of the House said about Trump doing this, we asked him to light a candle on the table, not set the table on fire. And this may be a case of the people within the Trump administration just jumping to do this to just clear out a path and not thinking about what the downstream effects were. Although Vice President Mike Pence has been a strong social conservative and opposed to LGBT protections while governor of Indiana for years, as well as when he was a member of the House.
Yeah. Well, it certainly is befuddling. I don't know.
It's hard for me to understand that they wouldn't have a clearer picture of the pushback that this would get, given the experience of North Carolina over the last year and the attention and negative attention that it brought when there was, such a hastily reacted to policy that was established and in fact legislation that went into effect, and then such a huge blowback from people around the country, and that the White House would be unaware of that, especially given the fact that it was such a recent policy change that there was actual written policy and implementation of written policy in effect and going forward. It is mind-boggling to me.
Playing devil's advocate, though, we didn't, when we were fighting the campaign to get a policy in place protecting transgender service members, we didn't have much in the way of polling data ever to clue us in whether or not, we had public support for this. After the White House did this, though, and targeted people who are in place doing their job and nobody's been hearing about troubles, the fact that the polling data came in favor of us so strongly was very reassuring. And it's a good sign that this is really kind of a non-issue to most of the American public after the end of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and people look back at Don't Ask, Don't Tell as kind of a done deal, even more so than marriage, that this is not a place we're going to go back to. But it begs the question, if they manage to ram this through and kick out transgender service members, what legal rationale would there be? How would you make an argument that you couldn't do the same thing to re-implement Don't Ask, Don't Tell with an executive order? What would stop that legally if you could do that to transgender people? I think that's kind of an important question.
Yeah.
It was very interesting going through the Don't Ask, Don't Tell and the repeal of that in 2011. There's all kinds of sky is falling type of reaction to that, and that there was going to be this mass exodus of qualified service members that would leave because of now that gay and lesbian service members could serve openly and it fully, and it just didn't happen. And I think that had a reaction to a lot of our service members that would say that, look, this is simply not an issue. That if we come back to the idea of, can they do the job? And if you were to go back in a policy by virtue of the commander-in-chief implementing without justification any kind of to go back and say that gay and lesbian members are no longer compatible with military service as they were once deemed to be, that would have such a strong reaction in the service community because that is just simply known not to be true. And have a different generation of soldiers. My son's in the Army. You have a different generation of soldiers that is fully accepting, or not fully, but almost nearly completely accepting of gay and lesbian as well as transgender service members, and that's just would be a huge uproar if there were to be that kind of change going back.
Absolutely, there would be an uproar. But the reason I even bring it up is that the Family Research Council, an anti-LGBT hate group as designated by the Southern Poverty Law Center, claimed credit for the Trump administration's tweets about transgender people, and getting this tweet ban in place. What's really interesting, though, is that very recently, the Family Research Council was always opposed to the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and continued to push very hard for it to be brought back, claiming that letting gays and lesbians serve was causing massive increase in suicide and sexual assault and any statistic of adverse climate in the military that they could find. They would claim that gays and lesbians are responsible for it. So as bizarre as it sounds to say that, could we see an executive order banning lesbians and gays from the military? Well, the group that got this tweet to go through is still pushing for that exact thing right now, that they want to ban gay and lesbians too, and they're still pushing for it, and they have very, very considerable influence within the White House. They had 3 of their senior members on the Trump administration's transition team.
And thanks very much
to both
Kris
of
and
you
Brynn for participating. We really appreciate it. Great discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Kris and Brynn.
Thank you for letting me continue.
I think that Trump is the only one who believes his tweet.
I'm sure he has some other, but boy, it sure seems like he's out there on a limb on this one. So.
Well, we hope you enjoyed this bonus reel. This is Bob Ambrogi. Join us next time for another episode of Lawyer to Lawyer.